They told us it was a carnival sideshow. A noble doctor saving premature babies, displayed for a nickel between the freak show and the Ferris wheel. This is the official narrative. A story so logistically impossible, so fundamentally absurd. It demands our cognitive dissonance to function. Why would a life-saving medical breakthrough be peddled as cheap entertainment? This wasn't a rescue mission, it was a production line. Haven't you ever looked at these old photographs and felt a deep, quiet hum of wrongness, as if the pieces simply don't fit? If you also feel this noise in history, as if something doesn't add up, leave your trail in the comments. Where and what time are you watching from? The official narrative begins to fray, not with a sound, but with a sight. The evidence of this grand deception is not buried in a redacted file. It is hidden in plain sight, in the faded sepia of old photographs. They call them the world's fairs, the great exhibitions. We must learn to see them for what they were, the showrooms for a new humanity, set against the backdrop of an inherited post-cataclysmic world. Look at the architecture. We are told these were temporary structures, palaces of plaster and wood erected for a summer's entertainment. In London, at Earl's Court, the same exhibit drew massive crowds. In Paris, at the Exposition Universelle, the Couvoir d'Enfants was a celebrated attraction. From city to city, nation to nation, the hardware is identical. The cover story is identical. The outcome is identical. A sudden, inexplicable surplus of parentless children. And just as the solution was global, so too was the engineered problem. While America had its orphan trains, a vast logistical network shipping 250,000 children to the empty farmlands of the West, the same program ran under different names elsewhere. In the British Empire, they were called the Home Children. Over 100,000 supposedly destitute children were shipped from the United Kingdom to Canada, to Australia, to New Zealand, to South Africa. The same mass transit of human stock, the same narrative of salvation, the same destination, newly emptied lands in need of a population. These were not disconnected national charities. They were the synchronized distribution arms of a single global entity, operating with an efficiency that no government of the 19th century could possibly have achieved. It was the seamless execution of a control matrix. This synchronicity extends far beyond the human element. Look at the stages where this drama was performed. The world's fairs. From the White City of Chicago in 1893, to the Parisian Exposition of 1900, to the 1901 Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, to the Saint. This is the first lie. Your eyes tell you the truth. These are not festival halls. They are temples. They are cyclopean structures of granite and stone, built with a science of harmony and scale we can no longer replicate. Feel the texture of that stone through the photograph, the impossible precision of the masonry. Notice the shadows cast by doorways built for giants, not for the small, mud-spattered men in bowler hats who stand before them, looking like squatters in a kingdom they did not build. This is the peasant paradox in its most stark form. Divine infrastructure inhabited by a population that seems to have just discovered the combustion engine. They trundle past these monolithic temples in horse-drawn carts. Their primitive technology, a jarring anachronism against the majestic, silent power of the buildings themselves. Now, step inside. Move past the grand colonnades and into the heart of the anomaly. Here, within these halls that resonate with a lost science, we find the supposed main attraction. Not art, not industry, but life itself, displayed as a commodity. Rows upon sterile rows of glass and metal boxes. The incubators. Look at the sheer scale of the operation. This is not a desperate makeshift clinic. This is a factory floor. The arrangement is one of industrial efficiency, a production line for human beings. Louis World's Fair of 1904. Lay the photographs side by side. The architecture is not merely similar, it is the same. This style they call Beaux-Arts, or Renaissance Revival, is a misnomer. It is a brand identity. It is the unmistakable signature of a single, unified, global civilization. A civilization whose magnificent, harmonic structures were not built for a 6-month fair by men with horse-drawn carts. They were the existing, inherited infrastructure of the previous age. These were not fairgrounds. They were repurposed capital districts, command and control centers of a world that had just been wiped clean. And in that moment of clarity, the three great anomalies of the 19th century lock into place. It is not a series of coincidences. It is a system. A terrifyingly simple, three-part machine for restarting civilization. First, you have the empty, magnificent cities. The inherited infrastructure. Palaces of stone and copper domes, silent and waiting, their lower floors often buried in meters of mud, a testament to the recent cataclysm. The hardware. Second, you have the world's fairs and their incubator pavilions, the production and distribution centers. Using the recovered *antiquitech* of biogenesis, a new population is generated, a blank slate, with no memory of the world that came before. The product. And third, you have the orphanages and the orphan trains. The so-called nurses move with a chilling rigidity. Their faces are not etched with the frantic compassion of a neonatal ward. They hold a pose of cold efficiency, of workers overseeing a delicate but repetitive manufacturing process. The air in these photographs is thick, not with medical urgency, but with the quiet, industrial hum of mass production. And the crowds press in, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and consumerist awe. They are not witnessing a medical miracle. They are inspecting a new product. Look closely at these photographs. Stare into the eyes of the onlookers, at the posture of the nurses. If you, too, see not a hospital but a factory, if you feel the chilling logic of a production line, then you are beginning to see the truth. Acknowledge what your intuition is telling you. If you see the impossibility of it all, let the algorithm know that more eyes need to be opened to this cognitive dissonance. The dissonance deepens when you examine how this technology interacts with its environment. These incubators, presented as the pinnacle of modern invention, are modern machines placed inside ancient temples. They are an alien insertion. The technology is too clean, too standardized, too mature for a supposed prototype phase. It feels less like an invention and more like a piece of inherited technology, found and reactivated. The processing and indoctrination centers. Here, the newly produced humans are given their basic programming, a simplified language, a fabricated history of struggle and progress, and a manufactured identity, American, British, German, French. The software. The incubator system is the key. It is the missing link that connects the empty cities to the orphan crisis. It is the engine that powered the entire repopulation effort. Without it, the story is a collection of impossible paradoxes. With it, every piece falls into place. The world's fairs were not a celebration of a new era. They were the showrooms for the new citizens who would inhabit it. The orphanages were not a response to a social crisis. They were the primary schools for a manufactured populace. And the grand cities were not the work of our recent ancestors. They were the magnificent inheritance they were programmed to manage, but never to truly understand. This is not a story confined to dusty archives. The evidence of this global, unified civilization is still standing. It is all around us. It is the old central post office in your city, the one that looks like a Roman temple. It is the state capitol building with a dome far too grand for a fledgling government. It is the downtown library that looks like a Greek palace, supposedly built in an age of mud streets and steam engines. And the buildings themselves tell a story of recent trauma. Look at the windows of these grand halls, often buried to their sills in what can only be described as settled earth. Observe the massive street levels, where entire floors of these palatial structures lie submerged beneath the new ground line. This is the great silence of the mud flood, the physical scar of the reset event. The incubators were not designed with Mies buildings. They were installed into Niznuro after they were unearthed. They were the hardware of repopulation, installed into the reclaimed infrastructure of a dead civilization. We are not looking at history. We are looking at a crime scene, an operation to fill the deafening silence of these inherited, empty cities with a new, programmable populace, incubated by the thousands and utterly disconnected from the world they were born to inherit. And so every grand deception requires a hero, a human face to place upon an inhuman mechanism. For the industrial-scale repopulation program of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, they gave us the comforting fable of Dr. Martin County. The official narrative, the one etched into the approved textbooks, is a heartwarming tale of philanthropic ingenuity. A lone, maverick doctor, a showman with a heart of gold, who fought a skeptical and backwards medical establishment to save the lives of premature babies. These structures are the fingerprint, the DNA of a lost world, a world that was contiguous, interconnected, and technologically advanced beyond our comprehension. We have been taught to see them as isolated curiosities, as the quaint ambitions of our forefathers. This is a lie. They are the scattered remnants of a single planetary kingdom. They are the nodes of a global energy grid we no longer know how to turn on. These structures are a resonance, a quiet hum beneath the noise of our fabricated history. Pause for a moment and truly look at the world around you. This architectural signature is everywhere, in every nation. Have you seen these buildings? The ones that feel out of place, out of time? The ones with colossal doors for a population of giants, and windows that start at ground level because the street is 10 feet higher than it used to be? You have. They are in your city. They are in your town. Tell us where. We are mapping the echo of this lost empire. Every courthouse, every city hall, every old bank is a clue. The fragmentation of this world into competing nations and languages was the masterstroke of the engineering of oblivion. It created a psychological firewall preventing us from recognizing the obvious, that we are all living in the ruins of the same single house. He is painted as a saint, a rogue humanitarian, who took his miraculous glass and steel wombs to the midways and boardwalks, funding his life-saving crusade with the nickels and dimes of curious fairgoers. It's a beautiful story. It has a hero, a villain, and a vulnerable innocent victim. It is also a logistical and financial impossibility, a masterclass in the engineering of consent. Let us, for a moment, suspend our disbelief and attempt to accept this story as history. We are asked to believe that a single individual, a man with no formal, verifiable medical credentials, was the sole proprietor of what was, effectively, the most advanced network of neonatal intensive care units on the planet. For 40 years, he supposedly financed this continental operation, the transport of hundreds of delicate, heavy, and complex machines, the construction of elaborate pavilions, the hiring and housing of legions of nurses, the constant maintenance, the utilities, all from the proceeds of a 25-cent admission ticket. We invite you to perform this calculation yourself. Consider the sheer weight of the capital required. This was not a puppet show in a tent. These were climate-controlled, sterile environments, operating with a precision that modern hospitals would respect. The numbers do not just fail to add up. They mock the very concept of arithmetic. We are a species with amnesia, arguing over the names of the rooms while the blueprint for the entire palace sits right in front of our eyes, written in stone. What happens to a mind born into a vacuum? A consciousness decanted from a glass box, with no mother's face to imprint upon, no ancestral stories whispered into its ear. What becomes of a species when its first generation is a product, not a progeny? The answer is the most tragic, most profound truth of our condition. We became a cargo cult, a planet of inheritors who mistook the control room for a temple. This is the story of us, the orphans of the reset, living as squatters in the palace of our forgotten fathers. Imagine this first wave. These children, processed through the orphanages, taught a rudimentary language and a fabricated history, and then released into the silent, colossal cities. They walked on heated marble floors in coarse wool and leather shoes. They stared up at gilded ceilings depicting star charts they could not read, powered by a technology they could not comprehend. They were surrounded by automated infrastructure, by public transport systems that lay dormant, by fountains that once drew energy from the ether. They had the structures, but not the schematics. The cognitive dissonance required to accept this financial model is staggering. It is not a business plan. It is a fairy tale. It is the story of a man who built an empire of glass and steel by selling popcorn. And what of the supposed villain in this drama? The rigid, unfeeling medical establishment. The story insists they rejected Keeney's methods, dismissing him as a charlatan. This is a crucial element of the cover story, the classic, lone genius against the world archetype. But the explanation is far too convenient. A more logical analysis suggests it was not rejection, but jurisdictional separation. The established medical system simply wasn't part of this particular operation's chain of command. They weren't rejecting a medical breakthrough. They were observing a program that operated completely outside their paradigm, a program with an objective that had nothing to do with public health as they understood it. County wasn't a threat to their authority. He was a contractor, a public relations manager, for a project so vast and so secret that it had its own infrastructure, its own supply chain, and its own silent, invisible board of directors. He was the perfect frontman, charismatic, plausible, and, most importantly, not an insider who could expose the true machinery. He didn't invent the technology. The machines, but not the manuals. The language, but not the lexicon of its creators. This is the genesis of our collective cognitive dissonance. When a primitive mind encounters advanced technology it cannot understand, it does not seek to reverse engineer it. It seeks to appease it. It begins to worship it. The function is lost, and in its place, ritual is born. They saw the towering cathedrals, vast resonant chambers designed for harmonic energy generation and atmospheric regulation, and they did not see a power plant. They felt the acoustic perfection, the way a single voice could fill the void, and they concluded it was a house for an invisible God. The hum of the machine was replaced by the echo of the choir. The science of frequency was replaced by the dogma of faith. We still gather in these stone computers today, performing a ritual whose original purpose is a ghost in ourselves. They saw the obelisks and the spires that once drew and broadcast telluric energy, powering the grid of the old world. They saw them as fingers pointing to the heavens, and so they placed crosses atop them. They converted broadcast antennas into bell towers, signaling not a data packet, but the call to prayer. The engineering of forgetting was so complete that we began to believe these technological marvels were built by our own recent ancestors, with hammers and chisels out of sheer devotion. He managed its public exhibition. He didn't pioneer a medical technique. He curated the narrative that would mask an industrial process. The story of Martin County is the keystone in the arch of this deception. Without him, we are left with a terrifying anomaly. Thousands of standardized high-tech machines appearing simultaneously across the Western world, operated with military precision, producing a generation of human beings with no recorded parentage. Without the fable of the kindly showman, the operation reveals its true nature, impersonal, systematic, and centrally controlled. He is the human mask on the face of the machine. The emotional misdirection. They give us a man to admire so we do not question the logistics of his alleged creation. They tell us to focus on the babies he saved, so we do not ask where, precisely, such an unprecedented number of premature infants came from, all at once in city after city. The official story is not history. It is an alibi. It is a carefully constructed narrative designed to collapse under the slightest pressure of critical thought. It is a script written by the inheritors of a world they did not build, to explain the origins of a population they themselves manufactured. And so, we must ask you, the intelligent observer, does this chronicle resonate with the cold, hard logic of reality? We credit primitives with the work of titans because the alternative, that we are the primitives, is too devastating to contemplate. This was not merely an architectural misunderstanding. It was a complete reprogramming of the human soul. The very concepts that define us were installed like software into these empty vessels. The family unit, the flag, the nation-state were not organic developments. They were a cover narrative, a piece of social software designed to create cohesion and control where no natural bonds existed. Loyalty to a nation became the substitute for a lost ancestral lineage. Patriotism became the ghost of a forgotten planetary consciousness. We were given flags and anthems to distract us from the fact that we have no memory of our true tribe. We were given religions to make us kneel in buildings we should have been operating. This is the mimetism of the survivor. We mimic the motions of a civilization we cannot understand. We are actors on a stage we did not build, reading from a script we did not write. We go to our jobs in monolithic structures, moving through transportation grids, using communication networks, all of it a pale, degraded echo of the inherited technology that surrounds us. We have ritualized the fragments of a lost science. Our most sacred ceremonies, our civic duties, our systems of governance, they are the corrupted remnants of a user manual we can no longer read. Or does it feel thin? Does it sound like a documented historical event? Or does it sound like a lullaby? A soothing story sung to a generation of orphans to keep them from asking who their real parents were and why they were abandoned in a world of silent, magnificent ruins. The script has been presented to you your entire life. But for the first time, perhaps, you are beginning to see the stagehands in the shadows and the cracks in the painted backdrop. The sentimental fable of the lone, heroic doctor is where the cover narrative is at its most fragile. It is a story designed for the heart, not for the mind. Because when we disengage from the engineered emotion and engage the cold, unforgiving calculus of logistics, the entire edifice collapses. This is not a matter of interpretation. This is a matter of physics, of economics, of industrial reality. This is the audit. And the books do not balance. The official history presents us with a paradox, a sudden, inexplicable demographic crisis in the late 19th century, an explosion of orphans. We are told to accept this as a natural byproduct of industrialization and poverty. But this is a lazy answer, a narrative anesthetic. Let us apply pressure to this assumption. The orphan trains, a well-documented logistical operation, transported over 250,000 children from the east coast of America into the heartland. The great silence from the stars is matched only by the great silence in our own past, and so we live with a constant, low-grade hum of psychic pain. A feeling that something is profoundly wrong, a sense of homelessness even when we are in our own homes, a deep, unplaceable grief for something we cannot name. This feeling is not a malfunction. It is a resonance with a truth buried just beneath the surface. It is the amnesiac child, standing in his father's library, unable to read the titles on the books, but feeling their weight, their importance, their silent accusation. We are a species with phantom limb syndrome. We can feel the memory of a past that has been amputated. If this vision of a lost humanity, of a planetary cargo cult, resonates with you in a place deeper than intellect, if you feel the truth of this sorrow in your own bones, then check to ensure you are subscribed. We are not building a channel here. We are assembling a recovery team for a memory that was stolen from all of us. We need awakened minds for the work that lies ahead. Because the evidence of our inheritance is not hidden in a faraway tomb. It is in the very streets we walk upon, in the stone of the buildings we pass every day. 250,000. Pause for a moment and attempt to visualize that number not as a statistic, but as a physical reality. This is not the population of a town. It is the population of a significant city. For this number to be produced organically through misfortune, it would require a societal breakdown on a scale that would be the central story of the age. It would mean hundreds of thousands of families simultaneously failing, dying, or abandoning their young in a concentrated period. The plague-like conditions required to generate such a surplus of human beings are not recorded because they did not happen. This was not a refugee crisis. It was a distribution program. The question was never, how do we save these poor orphans? The real, operational question was, where do we put the latest production batch? Now, let us examine the proposed source of this new population. The incubator pavilions. The official account paints them as small-scale, desperate life-saving stations. The photographs tell a different story. They depict industrial-scale installations, arrays of machines that speak not of emergency care, but of standardized production. Let's run a conservative calculation. A single major exhibition, like the one in Buffalo or Chicago, featured as many as 100 incubators operating simultaneously. We were not born to be tenants. We were born to be custodians. And the first step to reclaiming our home is to remember that we were never, ever orphans. And so, we became a cargo cult, performing rituals in the shadow of a forgotten science. But this amnesia was not an accident. It was a sentence. The final act of a crime so vast, it erased the crime scene itself, and then erased the memory that a crime had ever been committed. To understand the incubator, to understand the orphan, we must first face the event that created the vacancy. We must stand at the edge of the abyss and listen to the great silence. The historical record whispers of a cataclysm, sanitizing it with gentle terms like the year without a summer, or localized fires and floods. This is a profound lie. It was not a gentle flood of rising water. It was a wave of liquid earth, a sudden and violent liquefaction of the soil, a scream of atmospheric plasma that boiled the sky and flashed fossilized life. A planetary frequency weapon, perhaps, that turned the very ground we stand on into a muddy, ravenous grave, swallowing entire city levels in an instant. This was not nature. This was an execution. It left the grand infrastructure, the resonant cathedrals, the star forts, the atmospheric energy grid, scarred but standing, like immaculate bones picked clean of all life. These fairs ran for 6 months. Let's be generous to the official story and assume a high mortality rate, despite their claims of 85% success. Let's say a single incubator produces just one viable graduate per month. 100 incubators for 6 months. That is 600 new human beings from a single fair. Now, factor in their claimed success rate, and the number jumps closer to 1,000. This was not an isolated event. This operation ran for 40 years across dozens of cities in North America and across Europe. The math begins to paint a chilling picture. We are not looking at a few thousand premature babies saved over half a century. We are looking at a system capable of generating tens, if not hundreds of thousands of new citizens, a number that strangely, conveniently, aligns with the inexplicable glut of orphans that needed to be processed and distributed by the orphan trains and their global equivalents. The numbers do not whisper, they scream. They scream that the incubators were not hospitals, they were hatcheries. But the demographic mathematics are only the first layer of the impossibility. The true logistical black hole is the industrial supply chain, or more accurately, the complete absence of one. We are asked to believe that one man, Martin County, a showman of dubious medical credential, orchestrated a multinational industrial manufacturing operation in the age of the steam engine and the horse-drawn cart. An empty world, waiting for new tenants. And, in the quiet aftermath, the inheritors, the parasite class who either orchestrated the event or were uniquely positioned to survive it, emerged from their protected enclaves. They looked upon a silent, magnificent world, a kingdom without subjects, a machine without operators. They needed a workforce, a compliant, uneducated, and, most importantly, historically sterile population, to dig out the buried avenues and repopulate the gilded halls. They needed a people with no memory of what this world once was. They needed us. This is where the true crime begins, the engineering of forgetting. It was a multi-pronged assault on reality itself. First, the Great Archive burning, a systematic global campaign of erasure. Libraries became bonfires. University records, patent offices, family histories, geological surveys, technological schematics, all turned to ash. Any text that spoke of the previous age, its energy science, its lifespan, its true history, was declared heresy and consigned to the flames. They created a vacuum, a void where our past was supposed to be. Then, they began the implantation of the new narrative, a cover story, to explain the impossible. They assigned the Cyclopean architecture to our own recent ancestors, inventing lone geniuses and robber barons, who supposedly built these millennial structures in a few years with horse-drawn carts and primitive tools. Consider what is required to produce a single one of these incubator units. It is not a wooden box with a hot water bottle. It is a piece of precision engineering. It requires a forged steel chassis, uniformly shaped and riveted. It requires large panes of clear, untainted glass, curved and fitted to precise specifications. It requires a reliable thermostat for minute-by-minute temperature regulation, a technology that was in its absolute infancy. It requires a filtered air circulation system, a heating element, and a humidification apparatus. Now multiply that complexity by the thousands of units that were in operation across the globe. Who built them? Which factory had the tooling to mass-produce these identical, standardized units? Where are the foundries that cast the metal frames, the glassworks that produced the viewing panels, the workshops that assembled the delicate regulatory components? The Industrial Revolution was not shy. Its titans, Carnegie, Rockefeller, Ford, were proud of their output. They documented their processes, patented their inventions, and advertised their capabilities. Yet, for this vast international medical industrial enterprise, there is a profound and deafening silence. There are no corporate records, no detailed schematics in the patent offices, no factory floor photographs, no shipping manifests detailing the transport of tons of steel and glass for baby-making machines. It is a logistical paradox designed to induce cognitive dissonance, to make us feel small and inadequate in the face of our own inheritance. They gave us a new, brutal history of struggle and toil, of short lifespans and constant war, to replace the memory of a global, harmonized civilization. The incubator and the orphanage were not just a solution to a population problem. They were the final stage of this engineering. They were the factory floor for the new human, a blank slate, disconnected from any ancestral memory, ready to be programmed with the new, false history. Our very identity is the product of their amnesiac assembly line. The silence is their most potent weapon. It is the sterile environment in which their lies can grow. But it is a fragile silence. It shatters with a single shared question. Sharing this information is not an act of communication, it is an act of resonance, a defense against the dying of the light. Send this to the others, to those who you feel are ready to remember. This brings us to the final, unavoidable conclusion. The story of the incubators, of the orphan trains, is not a historical curiosity about a forgotten generation. It is the foundational myth of our own. It is the story of our genesis. This is a negative evidence event of the highest order. An industrial project on the scale of shipbuilding or arms manufacturing has left no industrial footprint. It is as if these thousands of complex machines simply materialized at fairgrounds around the world. This vacuum of evidence leads to only one logical, albeit terrifying, conclusion. The technology was not invented in the late 19th century. It was found. It was a piece of recovered, inherited technology, antiquitech, from the civilization that built the cyclopean structures these fairs were held in. County's operation was not one of invention, but of reverse engineering, reactivation, and mass implementation. He was not a pioneering doctor. He was the foreman of a salvage operation. This explains the maturity and standardization of the design. It explains the lack of a developmental paper trail. They were not wrestling with prototypes. They were simply switching on a system that already existed. And then there is the resource logistics of the operation itself. Feeding a single infant is a demanding task. Feeding hundreds of them in a centralized location, 24 hours a day, is an undertaking that would strain a modern hospital. What was the fuel source to heat these hundreds of incubators, day and night, for months on end? Coal? Gas? The sheer tonnage required would have been astronomical, the air quality in the pavilions unbreathable. We are, in our very essence, a civilization of orphans, afflicted with a deep and unspoken cosmic orphanhood. We wander the halls of a magnificent inheritance, believing we built it ourselves, yet unable to replicate a single stone. We have been taught that the crude hut we erected in the garden is the entire palace, and we have accepted this diminishment as our history. We are the heirs to a kingdom, meticulously conditioned to believe we are merely tenants, perpetually indebted to the unseen landlords who hold the original deeds. This is the source of the cognitive dissonance that plagues the modern soul. The pervasive, gnawing sense that we are living within a profound lie, disconnected from our true past, from the earth, and from our own potential. Our most cherished institutions, our national identities, our very concept of family, these were not organic developments. They were modules, installed into a blank slate population to create a functional, predictable, and controllable society. The matrice of control was not built around us. It was programmed within us from the very first incubator. But a program written on a faulty premise can never be stable. The code is beginning to fracture. To acknowledge the logistical paradox of the official narrative is to pull the first thread, and once pulled, the entire fabricated tapestry of history begins to unravel. Or were they, like the buildings they occupied, connected to a different, cleaner power source that has since been erased from our memory? And what of the food? Where did they source the thousands of gallons of milk required daily? Was it an army of wet nurses, hidden from the public eye? Or was a specialized formula being produced and delivered on an industrial scale, another ghost in the logistical machine? Every single practical question you ask about the day-to-day operation of these facilities reveals another layer of impossibility. The entire story is a house of cards, built on a foundation of pure fiction. The numbers present a stark equation. On one side, we have the official narrative, which requires us to believe in a phantom industrial empire and a demographic crisis that appeared from nowhere. On the other side, we have a coordinated, global repopulation effort using recovered technology. One of these scenarios violates every known law of logistics, economics, and industrial history. The other is simply monstrous. The mathematics do not lie. If a logical path exists that reconciles the official narrative with the sheer tonnage of required materials and the demographic output, we would be eager to examine the schematics. We have found none. The audit is complete. The verdict is in. The investigation into our stolen past is therefore not an academic pursuit. It is the fundamental act of reclaiming our identity. It is an act of neurological and spiritual warfare against the engineering of forgetting. They thought they had erased everything. But they failed. The memory is not lost. It is dormant, encoded in the silent resonance of the stones we inhabit. It whispers from the impossible arches, the buried windows, and the harmonic geometry of every structure they told us was a church, a bank, or a train station. We were taught to see these buildings as monuments to a past we barely understand. We must now learn to read them as the primary documents of our hijacked civilization, the last library of a forgotten science. This is the redefinition of human identity. We are not the primitive species that stumbled out of mud huts into the industrial age by a series of fortunate accidents. We are the amnestic descendants of the architects, the rightful heirs to an inherited technology we have forgotten how to operate. And the memory of what we were is the key to unlocking what we can once again become. The forensic audit of our timeline does not end here. This is not a story, it is an activation. If the resonance of this truth echoes within you, if you feel the call to move from spectator to investigator, then our work together has just begun. We are the descendants of an operation, not an evolution. The industrial mathematics of the orphan crisis simply do not compute. The official narrative, a fragile tapestry of poverty and disease, unravels under the slightest logistical pressure. We are told this technology was invented, but we find no factories. We are told it was a business, but we find no ledgers. This absence, this great silence where an industrial backbone should be, is not a void, it is the evidence. It proves the system was not built, but found. It was a component of a much larger machine, a piece of inherited technology reactivated for a singular, desperate purpose. And once you accept this premise, the scale of the operation ceases to be a local anomaly and reveals itself for what it truly is, a global protocol. The cognitive dissonance begins to resolve when you detach the Incubator exhibits from American soil. This was never just a strange sideshow at Coney Island or the Chicago World's Fair. It was a standardized franchise, deployed with chilling uniformity across the entire Western world. In Berlin, in 1896, the Great Industrial Exposition featured a pavilion for premature infants. They called it the Kinderbrutenstalt, the child hatchery. The same glass boxes, the same stoic nurses, the same public spectacle. The path to remembering is a difficult one, and it is not meant to be walked alone. Join the reclamation. Welcome to the resistance.